Yo, yo. Welcome back to the Spiritual Gap Outdoors Edition.
Woo!
The first 70-degree weekend. It's Monday.
It's Monday.
70. The machine, Alexa, this morning says 73 in Salem today.
Wow.
I don't know if that's true or not, but right now it's like 59 outside in the shade.
It feels good.
I'm wearing a sweatshirt. Bryce is rocking the t-shirt.
Rocking the t-shirt. I did choose a spot in the sun, though.
Yeah, you did. I guess there's some slight sun.
Yeah.
But it looks good. It's nice to be outside. I hope you guys, whoever's listening, can make it outside sometimes.
I mean, by the time
there's power of being outside.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, by the time this releases, I think...
It'll be raining.
Yeah, it'll be raining again.
But you can watch this podcast in memory of the one weekend it was sunny in Salem, Oregon.
In March.
But I mean, our whole concept of this podcast, I mean, the core theme was slowing down, or is slowing down. And Bryce, why do you think nature helps people slow down so much? I will say, have you seen those memes that hiking out in nature is just a white person thing?
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
I think it's partially true, but...
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that would be an interesting thing to explore of like why that is. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know. I feel like anyone can get out. I mean, I feel like you also get a lot of Asian folks. Like if you go to national parks, tends to be a lot more Asian folk. I think it's more of like a monetary thing. You know, when we lived in Memphis, it was weird. Like just not a lot of people got outside.
Really?
Yeah.
It's like a cultural thing, maybe?
Yeah. Okay, so it was funny. When we were in Memphis,
Big city. How many people in Memphis? It's not that big.
It's like 500,000.
That's quite a few.
It's pretty big. But you didn't see nearly as many people outside. And when you would go to places, you would tend to see more white people outside, which is interesting.
It is Tennessee, though.
But I thought that what was really interesting is when you did see and this is even true in Salem. I remember Brooke and I going for a walk once. We were down at Riverfront. Yeah. This is back when Pokemon Go was super big.
Oh, so many people outside. It was wild.
And families, and same thing in Memphis. You wouldn't just see like one or two. Like if there was someone from like a minority group that was outside, it was like a whole family like spending time outside together. You know, so it was kind of interesting.
So Pokemon Go bringing people to nature. Why do you think the outdoors helps people slow down?
I don't know.
I mean, I think I read, I don't know if it's an article, maybe it's part of a book, the whole theory that in the United States, one of the reasons the tension is so high in the country is because people's anxiety is at a constant state of like... Their anxiety is constantly high. Mm-hmm. One of the theories is that if you look at the last 20, 30 years, the main city populations, I could be totally wrong in this, but I believe that main city populations has grown. And there's, like, if you go to, like, New York City downtown, you see no nature anywhere. You got Central Park, which is, I think, more an expensive area of New York.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, I've never been to New York proper, but there's not the ability to go to a place like this, which is like 5 minutes from each of our houses.
Yep.
Less than that. We can just like walk, not think about the internet and was it FOMO?
Yeah. Yeah.
FOMO means fear of missing out.
Birds and rabbits and I don't know. I think a part of being outside is there's just so much wonder, you know, and you just walk around and you just like look at things and you just like, it's always like, it's like here, you know, like you're saying, this is like 5 minutes from our houses, but every single time I come here, it's a little bit different, you know, and you're like getting out and so, yeah, I don't know.
Also think it makes you realize how small you are.
Oh, totally.
Compared to God's creation. Just to seeing everything like we're looking at right now. Giant trees, beautiful. There's a creek over there.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Lots of birds.
Yeah. And I feel bad for people who have been stuck in like a cubicle all day long. And if you are, try to make it outside.
Make it outside
5
today.
minutes.
Get outside.
Prayer walks are where it's
at. Go for a prayer walk. Take your lunch outside on a day like today.
100%.
It's good for you.
100%. And that's why I love the Pacific Northwest, is because when the sun comes out, people are like, they can't miss out on it. So I was driving through downtown the last couple days, and everyone's out. Downtown is packed. People are walking outside Isaac's room. They're sitting outside at Archive. They're going to Ritter's outside. Outdoor seating is packed. People are at Fork 40. All that stuff. They're so just good. Like downtown. There's like an energy in the Pacific Northwest when the sun comes out.
Dude, I
for the
feel
first time.
there's like that joke with people in the Pacific Northwest of you don't realize you have seasonal depression until the first sunny day in March.
Until the sun. It's
so true, man. You just feel so much better and so much happier and outside. And I think, we've talked about this. It's interesting. We talk a lot about like Jesus escaping to the wilderness
all the time.
But what's funny about that is like they just lived outside on the daily.
It's true.
They're outside walking around and fishing and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But he still took time to get away.
Yeah.
And be in solitude.
I mean,
crazy.
There's a trend. I don't know about trend, but you go to like more of the hippie type personality, natural minded people, where even almost like Amish, as in like electricity is not really healthy, as in like the reason the sun goes down is because like you should go to bed, like you shouldn't have to turn the lights on. But then you have the argument of like, what if you live in Alaska? In the summertime, you'd get like 2 hours of sleep.
You gotta work hard, man. You gotta work, but then you're
you
sleeping
just have to stay up all
22
night long.
hours a day in the
either sleep 20 hours a day, or in the summertime you literally never sleep.
Yeah.
But my wife, who's from Alaska, said that, I mean, there are people who like do gardening at 10 p.m. or 11, just like outside, because the sun's still up.
That's crazy.
Yeah, have you been to Alaska before?
No.
You look at the sun. The first time I went in the summertime, I think we landed at like midnight or 1 a.m. And it's not like the sun's in the middle of the sky.
Yeah.
It kind of like goes to the horizon, kind of like a sunset would look like in Oregon. And then it just kind of just goes along.
Just like,
and then it goes back up. Yeah. It never like officially goes down. And so it's kind of just like dusk all throughout the entire night. It's a really weird experience.
That's so cool.
Yeah. But I mean, it's darker. It's not like this.
Yeah. It's not like, it's like what, 12:30 right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think the point you brought up, Jesus often went away to pray. And I think there's a reason why he did that. And I think there's a reason why we should follow in his example with the constant state of anxiety of people today. Especially this year in 2024 with the elections. Man. Again, we've talked about this before, but now likely Biden-Trump rematch. I think that's all but I think it's all but official unless Biden drops out the last minute. So you got Biden and Trump back at it again. Last time that produced a lot of anxiety in our country. Last time that produced a lot of tension. A lot of, whoever wins, there'll be people mad. So I think one of the greatest gifts we can give as believers is the peace. Stillness of God. And I think if we get wrapped up in that ourselves, then it's a challenge.
I mean, because the reality is someone's going to win that election.
Hopefully someone wins.
Someone's going to win. And
I want to write Bryce's name in. One vote.
I'm not eligible.
Oh, that's right. You have to be 35?
35.
Dang it, I'm not eligible either.
Yeah.
I need one more year. I can run for president in a year and a half.
I can't even be a state senator. Or I can't even be a senator. You have to be 30 to be a senator.
What?
Yeah. 25.
Bryce, I can run for president next election. Man, I got some thinking to do.
I'd write you in. We need some young blood in there, Steven. Could you imagine a 35-year-old president?
No.
With the last, like...
Obama's the youngest one. I think he was like mid-40s.
42, I think, when he was elected.
That's pretty young.
That's pretty dang young.
He's set. I mean, the politicians, like as a president, I think after you do your term, so Barack Obama did 2 terms, and so I think he left presidency when he was like, what, 50? Early 50s?
It would have been, 50,
and then he
gets
paid, then you get paid $400,000 a year for the rest of your life. I think it's like a lot, and then you get Secret Service. That's not a bad way to retire right there.
That's not bad, man.
Retire at 50 as a career politician, 400 something. That's why, like, part of me, I don't know, but like with Biden, I'm like, dude, you're in your 80s, or Trump too. I'm like, go live your life, man.
Yeah.
Like, go spend time on the beach.
Maybe that's like...
maybe not, though. Maybe they just want to...
I don't know. Maybe that's like evidence that they care that much, you know?
Maybe.
They're like, I want to be a politician. I will die in office if I
Or
have to.
it's the depravity of man in pursuit of power. One or the
other. One or the other.
I don't know.
Could it be both? Who knows? Who knows? Okay, I have an interesting topic. Okay. Dunbar's number. Are you familiar with this?
Dunbar's number.
Dunbar's number.
Never heard of it.
So it's this...
What is Dunbar's number?
So Dunbar's number is this
Wikipedia?
This guy, his last name is Dunbar, came up, he was an anthropologist. he came up with this theory that humans are not meant to, like, our brains are not developed to exist in cohorts of more than like 150 or 200 people.
Oh, yeah, I have heard of this.
Yeah.
And so, like, you can, no matter how hard you try, you can't have any more than 150 acquaintances or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, it expands as, like, the more people you know. Oh, yeah, I understand. Can you explain it on a...
I mean, I don't know a ton about it, but I was thinking about, like, with, you know, we talk about like large churches and small churches. And
So it says, according to the British, I mixed British and anthropologist. So according to British anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the magic number is 150, and the article title is Why We Can Only Maintain 150 Relationships.
yeah. Anyways, so I think it's got to be relatively. I mean, I think if you just think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, listen to this one, though. Dunbar's number is a popular estimate for the maximum size of social groups, but new research suggests that it's a fictitious number based on flimsy data and bad theory. I mean, I do think there's a concept of the human brain can only handle so much.
I think so. I mean, I feel like whenever you put out something like that, there's always going to be a group of people that are like, let me debunk this. And then one article will debunk it. Because even, I mean, militaries use it, companies use it as a way of, like, there's a company, shoot, I can't remember the name. I believe they're in America, but they, when they get a facility that gets to 150 employees that work in that facility, they open up a new facility, even if it's right next door, but so that it's a whole different group of people, whole different cohort that exists together.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like, obviously, we're not researchers, and you can only share from your personal experience. And I think in my personal experience, you only have intimate relationships in small groups. Mm-hmm. I think we've all gone to I don't know, it's easy, and this is kind of what we've reflected on. If you have a large church setting, it's easy to go in and go out without anyone ever talking to you. Mm-hmm. Now, some people view that as a positive. And I'm not saying that is conclusive for every single large church, because some large churches kind of grow small, as in the more people they have, they're really just hyper-focused in on smaller communities. Mm-hmm. So you can still have a small church vibe in a larger church. But I do think, like, we only have the capacity in our own lives to really have intimate relationships with a few. And then you could use the example of Jesus. He had 12 that were his closest friends. And out of those 12... 3 were his most intimate.
72 that were kind of like hanging around.
And he had a ton of people following him.
Yeah.
I mean, crowds following him. He would go across the Sea of Galilee and people would follow. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a reason why Jesus specifically spent that much time with those specific people. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we have the greatest impact. And I think on an American level, as in, like, the reason I say American level is the way that Americans view relationships, the whole concept of everything has to be up and to the right. I think for the most part, we would view Jesus' life as a failure, as in, like, he could have built so much more. Yeah. I mean, he put the sins of the world on his back in a way that people thought would never work, as in, like, why are you doing this, Jesus? Even his own disciples were like, but
he could have done
what
more.
we want you to be. Yeah, he could have done more. Yeah. And so, but Jesus investing into those disciples had a generational impact. And I think that's what we don't value. Yeah. I think we don't value the generational impact of, if you invest in a few and then do that really well. I know Jesus's context was a little different because he knew he had a specific number of days and years to minister. But when he ascended into heaven, he gave the responsibility of the church to these 12 that he invested his whole life into. Yeah. At least his vocational ministry. And then they set the groundwork for the future of the church. And then you see this beautiful leadership development, and then Stephen was placed, like, the disciples were like, we have to focus on discipling people and preaching the word, and so we're going to put Stephen in charge of the food bank ministry, basically. And they expanded in that way, which is the whole concept of leadership development. Yeah. And so it's like the antithesis isn't the right word, but the whole era of the American view of church of, here's the pastor, I pay him to do the spiritual things, I pay him to do, all this stuff, to disciple, to preach the word. I just think that's a very poor view, and it doesn't give anybody any opportunities to grow themselves.
Yeah.
And to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, that like similar token, I think, we were talking a couple weeks ago about like two things I would say the church has done poorly. One of them is discipleship. I think, it was actually Ryan Unger. He was at a climbing conference, Climbers for Christ conference in Bend, and one of the speakers was talking about, a lot of times in ministry and in church we talk about impact. Like what's the, we fed 200 homeless people, or we did this many baptisms, and all this stuff is can be good, but like what is the ongoing faithfulness? Not just the like immediate impact of like 200 mouths fed, so many professions of faith. Like what is the ongoing faithfulness of discipleship, and then those people moving from disciples to disciple makers, and what's the generational impact of faithfulness, and not just like, hey, what are the cool flashy numbers that everyone wants to see on the annual report?
Dude, it's so hard, because that's, for the most part, I'm not making some huge statement of like this is how it is all the time, but that's how churches have defined success for decades upon decades. Of you can rate your success by how many people you have and how much your budget is growing.
Yeah.
But the challenge is, let's say a hypothetical situation, you inherit as a pastor, let's say. There's a church that has a lot of people who are really wealthy and they're giving a lot of money. And there's a few who are less wealthy, but they're more spiritually hungry.
Yeah.
And they're willing to be developed and to grow spiritually and to be challenged. And so if you focus in on that and really disciple those people who might not have as much wealth, in that you may lose some of the people who are wealthy, who are making the budget up here. And so these people, the ones with lesser money, may be growing spiritually, may be making now disciples in their own workplace environments, but you lose people in the church in the same way. And so then the budget goes down, but you are still accomplishing the goal.
Yeah.
In fact, you are succeeding in what you are trying to do.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to make disciples, follow in the example of Jesus, invest into people, teach people how to love well, minister well.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, maybe you're losing people, and maybe the budget's going down.
Right.
So like you're like, was that successful?
Yeah.
Well, it depends how you define success.
Yeah.
Do you define success as, is the budget always growing? Obviously, the budget growing is a wonderful thing that you would probably want. And maybe it's warning signs if the budget's declining and people are leaving, like maybe something's not healthy. Maybe I think it all just depends on context for the situation you're walking through. But it's difficult to define success differently than what the culture says is successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, was this before we started rolling? We were talking about what the church looked like. What the church looked like back in the early church would be like Amish living in New York City.
It's funny. I was listening to a podcast. It's Press and Sprinkle, The Theology and the Raw. Yeah, and it's so fascinating. One, I think we kind of put rose-colored glasses for the culture that the early Christians lived in, because it was pretty messed up.
Yeah.
Way jacked up. More so, like we think of, it was great actually. I think oftentimes when we put rose-colored glasses in, we put rose-colored glasses on for the past. When we're like, man, it was so much better back then.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was watching, my girls were singing in choir the song "She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain." She'll be coming around the mountain, like the song everybody knows. And so I looked up the video on YouTube, and the version was from the 1950s and the 1960s. I was reading the comments, and the top comment was a guy who said, man, I wish I could go back and live in the 50s and 60s. Oh, wait, no, I don't. I'm black. And I was like, oh, it's so, you know what I mean? Because it's like, we're like, oh, back in the 50s. I'm like, no, like, black people couldn't even vote. They didn't have any rights. Like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Nobody would want that.
Yeah. I was listening to, are you familiar with?
I was dying, though.
That's, yeah.
YouTube comments, man.
YouTube comments or
What do you
something
do?
else. Are you familiar with Riley Gaines?
Yeah, the NCAA girl who's suing the NCAA.
Dude, she's balling. Super strong believer. So I just listened
she
to
is?
her
I
Joe
know.
Rogan.
Okay.
I just finished it this morning, and she's like all about her faith.
Wow.
Yeah, it was super. Like she's on Joe Rogan is the biggest
Podcast
platform
in the world.
It's the biggest platform in the world. Has the most
Yeah.
viewership of anything. You know, and she's like, yeah, I'm a Christian, and this is why. Like, this is where my morality comes from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it's super interesting hearing her and Joe Rogan agree on so many things that all stem from her faith. But it's just so crazy. One of the things they mentioned, which is funny, you brought this up, of like, there's so much virtue signaling and gaslighting and all of this stuff that's happening in our culture with LGBTQ and so much stuff. But we live in the most diverse, inclusive, accepting culture and generation that has ever existed on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And we still just want more.
It's interesting because the guy I read a book by a guy named Michael Schellenberger
Yes.
about climate change.
Well,
And he's kind of says a similar thing.
Yeah.
As in like,
Apocalypse Never.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the book I read. Yeah. He says a similar thing where it's like, of course, there's still work to be done,
Yeah.
but things are going pretty well.
Yeah.
Of course, there's still things we can work on. Of course, there's still poverty, and
Yep.
there's still like human rights
There's
stuff
still
that
injustice.
yeah,
Yeah.
still injustice is happening. In the same way, he's like, climate change is a problem,
Yeah.
but it's a manageable problem.
Yeah.
But I think people, again, I tie it back into an anxiety. People's anxiety is just like,
Yeah.
we have to fix everything now. When it's like, we have to be real
Yeah.
with that we're just human sized.
Yeah.
And we're humans, that we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And we're always going to make mistakes, but that doesn't allow for, bad behavior or stuff like that. We can,
Yeah.
but it's repentance, it's forgiveness, it's
Yeah.
apologies, it's consequences sometimes, but
Yeah. It's so, it's funny because
it's hope though. There's hope.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned there's this aspect of joy and contentment. And, it's funny because I think it's so like, especially in America, we just have it so good. And we like to, it's funny talking about YouTube comments. I was reading something about, it was a post on Reddit or no. It was a post on Instagram. It was from Outside Magazine that said like, is it safe to travel to places like Costa Rica, Jamaica, and whatever? And all of the comments were like, it's got to be safer than the U.S., And I'm like, man, like, I don't think these people have ever been to a place like Tijuana, to like the Zona Norte or something like that, where like you can't go out at night. Even so when we were in Uganda, our Mustafa, our translator, so Ryan and Mustafa were talking about cannibals, which is a weird thing to be talking about. And so Mustafa asked Derek, the guy who runs the orphanage we're at, like, hey, are there cannibals in this area? He's like, oh yeah, just up the road. Like, don't go out walking at night. Like, if someone invites you in their house, don't go in. There's a trap. So they'll have you like sit down and there's a trap and a spear comes up and there's like cannibals. And you're like, what? Like, that's not here.
Yeah.
It's like, it's stuff like that just like because we don't see it and it's not on the news. Like, we don't see, you never hear about stuff like that. You never hear about like what's really happening on the front lines of somewhere like Gaza or Ukraine or, all it's. And so I think, I was thinking about all like, I haven't spent a ton of time in Uganda, but there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of illness. There's a lot of stuff that we just don't have in the West. Like someone gets a waterborne illness there, it's life-threatening.
Yeah.
And that's something that A, is super easily treatable in the U.S., and B, you're never going to get that in the U.S. because you're drinking incredibly clean water. Any spigot or faucet or whatever that you turn on in the U.S. is like 90% of the U.S. has clean water.
Yeah.
So it's not an issue here. But from a standpoint of joy and happiness and just overall like fulfillment in life, the people we met in Uganda were just like the happiest people you've ever met, despite all of that.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so wild this age that we're in the U.S. where I'm bringing this back to a spiritual topic of where does our joy come from, and where does our peace come from, and our hope, and for those of us who are believers, it comes through Christ, and we see so many people now that just don't have that joy and the peace and the contentment and the hope for the future and a perspective on your enemies. The world doesn't have, and I think that's man, I can't imagine living in that.
Have you seen what's happening in Haiti right now?
Dude, Florida's about to get.
I think it's fascinating. One, Haiti is, I believe it's one of the most impoverished nations in the world. Not in the Western Hemisphere, on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And I think in the last couple of months, some 3,000 something gang members were released from prison somehow. They broke out, and they took over basically the entire country. As in, I think they shut down the airport.
Government's gone.
Yeah. It's super dangerous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man.
And America's basically said, we will repatriate any Haitian that comes because basically the gang members took over and then just went around to all the prisons in Haiti and broke out all their friends.
Oh, goodness gracious.
And so America's we don't know who's who. So anyone that comes will be repatriated and sent back.
Wow.
And that's hard, man, because as, we want those people who are, their homes are being destroyed and they're being displaced. We want those people to have, to have freedom
and safety.
I
mean, that's why we're saying obviously there's still work that needs to be done. And there's always going to be pain in the world. And we want to do our Christian duty of whatever we can to help people. There's just a lot of pain. I want to go back to what you brought up about the Amish people. And
the Amish.
It was Preston Sprinkle who said it. He said the more he reads about Christian communities in the ancient world, the more that it seemed like Christians, they just had to stand out like a sore thumb of you would know that someone's a Christian by the way that they behave.
Yeah.
In the corrupt ancient world where there's discrimination, where there's just horrendous things happening, Christians are acting differently. And he equated it would be like living in downtown Las Vegas as an Amish person.
Yeah.
Everyone would be like, this dude's Amish.
Which one? The one in the horse and buggy?
He's not using a car.
Yeah.
He doesn't use the internet. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I feel and this is an area I can definitely grow in as well, Christians should be different.
Yeah.
You should be able to tell. And sadly, I was even talking with someone who was a former pastor, and they were just reflecting on how evangelicals were just been so horrendous to them and were so mean. Mm-hmm. And that makes me really sad.
Yeah.
I feel like Christian communities should be different. There should be less corruption.
Yeah.
There should be,
there should be no corruption.
There should, I mean, we're all humans, but
but
it's the ability to have the self-awareness and the community that Scripture talks about. And obviously, there's never going to be a time when we can enter into some utopia as Christians, oh, this is perfect people. That's never going to happen. But I think it's the ability to have the awareness that we will never be perfect without Christ.
Yeah.
And so then that gives you the humility to be able to address some of these difficult issues.
Yeah. I remember hearing a similar story about how, the early church in certain areas, obviously there were no abortion clinics, right? But they would, someone, if they didn't want their baby, they would, deliver the baby, and then they would go take it to the outskirts of the city and just leave it there.
Yeah.
And so the church would go out there and collect the babies and bring them back in and raise them.
Yeah.
And people, this was in an area where, you couldn't be Christian, but everyone knew who they were because they were the ones walking to the outside of the city and picking up babies that nobody wanted.
Yeah.
And I think it's stuff like that I think that we really need to grow in as a church, because there's so many of those opportunities in our community. Obviously no one is leaving babies on the side of the road anymore. Mm-hmm. but like the foster system, the child welfare system as a whole, you know, between kids and families and all sorts of stuff. Like, how is the church, you know, creating a positive change in that? The homeless community, how is the church, like, I don't remember who the quote was by. It was maybe St. Augustine. It was like, you know, if you want to know who the Christians are, don't go to the church, go to the poor and ask them who they are.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. Have you seen, I saw an article, I don't know if it's Statesman Journal, Salem Reporter, came out that it was over 1,000 students. So we live in Salem area, Salem Kaiser School District. I think it's the second biggest in the state. Over 1,000 students in the Salem Kaiser schools are considered homeless.
Yeah, either sleeping on someone's couch or
It was like 1,300.
yeah, it's crazy.
And I was like, man, I had no awareness of that. And it kind of gives you a, you know, you see the homelessness we have today. When you put someone in that situation, and you've interviewed some, like people live on the streets when they're 12.
Yeah,
I'm like, I've got a kid who's 10, and I'm like, man, like your brain's not even fully developed yet. And then like,
no, you got like 14 years before your brain's fully
yeah,
developed.
you're like a child. I mean, you're a child.
Yeah,
Like no child should ever have to be alone like that.
Yeah. I mean,
it just breaks your heart.
Yeah. Well, and like we were talking about we had a really bad shooting in Salem a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
And those are just kids, 16-year-old kids, you know? And like, what is how is the church being a part of positive change in those communities, you know? Like, and the crazy thing is like I know a lot of people that are in there doing the work, and they're not looking for a platform or a pedestal, or they're not out there asking people for money. They just put their heads down and they go to work, and they do some amazing work in the community, but you just don't hear about it because they're not going to boast about it. They're just going to do the work because they know that it needs to be done. But then you have a lot of people that stand on a pedestal and shout, "Hey, look at me. Look at all the stuff we're doing." And like, they're not the ones that are actually doing the work.
I think that's like, I think it's the future of the church. We've talked about this before, like the neighborhood, local churches and stuff like that. But I think it's more of a collaborative effort. It's less, I think for the most part, the church has turned into like a pyramid tier, kind of like corporate America, where you have the CEO here, and then, you know, whatever, the next leadership here, and then the congregation's down here. I think, Jesus teaches an opposite form of leadership.
Yeah.
Bottom-up leadership. And I think it's more of a collaborative effort where there's the ability to do things together, where it's not like, oh, here's the pastor, he's up here. It's like, no, I make a lot of mistakes. It's being able to do it together as a team of, we want to grow, we want to serve people, having the awareness of, like, we can't fix everybody all the time.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something I struggle with, is you start thinking about like 1,300 homeless kids. And you're like,
where do you even start?
Yeah, where do you start?
You know, what do you,
and
like,
part of it's like, you know, what's the root of the problem? You know, it's how can you support and serve families? And so those kids, like, preferably, they don't have to go to a foster home. Preferably, they have family members that are responsible and safe people to raise them and to care for them.
Yeah.
And so I think if you focus on, you know, family systems, you have a better effort for a long-term solution. But in the meantime, it's like, there's no quick answer. There's no slap some money on it, you know.
Yeah.
A-okay, good to go.
Yeah.
It's a big, it's just impossible to fix by yourself.
Yeah.
That's why we talked about as well, like a cultural change. We have to have the awareness, to have the ability to kind of start with one, do one at a time. So it's hard, but you do great work, and I think there's a lot of other people in the community making some really good contacts. I think it starts on a relationship level.
Totally.
We kind of put the defensives down. At the church, where the church is located, we're right next to a 7-Eleven, so we get some interesting people come through sometimes.
Yep.
And it turns into it can turn into a hot spot sometimes, in good ways and bad ways. we have. Am I getting eaten by mosquitoes?
It's a spider.
Oh, thank you. Look at that. Get out of here. A while ago, so kids from the local high school walk by our church to 7-Eleven. They usually get sodas and pizza and 7-Eleven hot dogs and stuff like that. So typically it's like, oh, you guys, let's get off the parking lot, whatever. I feel like that's historically been the view. And then I just kind of felt convicted, and I usually like talking to people and stuff. And I was like, I'm glad these guys are hanging out here.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, like our church is predominantly white, but this group of kids, they were like the most interracially mixed group I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I think I was the only white guy hanging out with them. And so, but they would come and they'd play basketball, usually like 5 to 10 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, I would come out of the church and be like, what's up, guys? I start playing basketball with them. And at first, they didn't really know what to do. And then I was like, I'm just going to go buy them some pizza. And so I would go to 7-Eleven or Little Caesars or something to buy a bunch of pizzas, put them out there, and they were kind of like, okay.
Yeah. Because they haven't seen the church be the church.
I mean, I'm not like speaking high. I was just like, because they left eventually, and I haven't seen them in quite a while.
Yeah.
But we put it's just so fascinating. Like, we used to have a lot of problems in our parking lot because glass would be shattered. There's a gravel area. People would do donuts. Glass would shatter. Trash every day. All this stuff. And I was like, well, we should put a basketball hoop up. Kids play basketball there. We put a basketball hoop up. Since we put that up, no problems.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
There's been no smashed glass, no trash.
Wow.
Nothing. And I'm not saying the answer to like community
Basketball
stuff
hoops
is like
everywhere.
every corner.
Yeah.
It might help. But it was more of the concept of like you want a place where people feel like they're safe and they can be, and it's okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just thought it was like just reflecting, I was like, that's so fascinating. Because I didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Because since I'd started the church, we'd always had problems there. Trash, garbage, all this stuff. And then it's just gone.
Yeah.
Because it's a place where people can hang out. And there's
Yeah.
high school kids playing there. There's neighborhood kids playing there. Literally every day someone's playing basketball there.
Oh, that's super rad.
And then no problems anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
that to me is like a case study. Like, this worked. I wasn't even meaning for it to work.
Yeah.
But
Like, what are we going to put in next?
yeah, I know. Skate park. No,
Go-kart track. Yeah.
But, and hopefully it's a goal eventually. If there's kids playing out there, if I'm working and stuff, I'll try to go out and shoot hoops with them and stuff. Because I'm like, most of these students haven't had a positive role model in their life or
Yeah.
a trusting adult. And
Yeah.
so, in my experience, they're so skeptical. They're like, who's this dude?
Yeah.
I'm some random mid-30s dude buying them pizza. So
Yeah.
they're like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
But, I feel like it's efforts like that, but on a cultural level, where instead of people are putting the walls up of defense, and like I think about the students who were involved in the shooting. I don't know who it was, but supposedly it was 2 larger groups of students. My reflection is, what if somebody before the shooting had been able to build relationships with them,
Yeah.
and so they were never there in the first place?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's wrong to hang out in a park, but I'm saying, what if they had a trusting adult? And maybe they do have them. Maybe it was just a poor choice that they had made. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it's
Yeah.
going to be a community-wide effort of people trying to bridge the gap.
Yeah. Well, and I think now, too, what's really important as a community to, there's a lot of people, having at Bush Park, which is a really popular park in downtown Salem. Like, there's a lot of people now that feel scared. They're like, I go to that park and my kids go to that park. But I think now it's up to the community to, I think, some of that fear is justified, of like, a stray bullet could hit a kid or a family or gone into a car.
The shooting was in the middle of the day.
Middle of the day,
like
like
1:45.
like literally middle of the day, And but I think now it's up to us as a community to, Oregon has the worst youth mental health in the entire country.
Really?
Like absolute bottom. Like of all 50 states, we are ranked number 50.
That's depressing.
And so I think it's up to us as a community now to look at stuff like that and be like, I think there's a tendency for people to be like, oh, well, he's just part of the system. And no, I mean, there's individual responsibility of like, you shouldn't shoot people. But I think it's up to us as a community not to label this kid as like, you're not a murderer. You're not which I think is the beautiful thing about the church is like, you're not a murderer or an adulterer or a liar or a tax collector or a fisherman. You're a child of God.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most beautiful thing about the church is that soon as you step into the church, we're all on the same playing field.
Yeah.
And so I think it's up to us as a community to realize like, hey, like this is a kid who struggles with identity. Not in the sense that this culture likes to say people struggle with identity, but like, this is a kid who needs to understand he's a child of God, not just a killer, not just a whatever.
By identity, I think it's like where your value is from. And one of our guys who goes to our church works he gets paid, I think, but he works at the juvenile detention center, I think. What is it? And, these are kids, 12, 13, 14. And they were just reflecting like, when you're out working with them, like working outdoors, landscaping type work, they're just kids. They're laughing, they're playing.
Oh yeah.
And then but their anxiety goes up, and immediately they turn to violence.
Yeah.
And it's just really sad that that's the state of like mental capacity that they're at. And again, I think the answer moving forward is the community effort of creating safe places, because when people feel not safe is when we talked about this in the same way with like the homelessness of when you sleep outside, it's not safe.
Yeah.
It's not. It's,
Your body's constant stuck in that fight or flight
trauma
constantly.
all the time. It's learning how to be a safe space. But man, that's hard. It's hard to have that cultural level, and we're this Sunday we're talking about the crucifixion. I was reading through it this morning, and I was reflecting on how Jesus fought. Because when Jesus goes to his death, he wasn't fighting the fight that everybody wanted him to fight.
Right.
But that doesn't mean he wasn't fighting.
Yeah.
He was just fighting something different that, on a spiritual level.
Yeah.
He was fighting against darkness, against spiritual darkness. And that meant he gave his life. And so I think sometimes even for Christians, it means we have to put ourselves in that same position of like, it might not be what everybody wants us to do, but it's the right thing to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking out loud, but it's to be the bridge builder, the one that takes that step forward of like, hey, I want you to know I'm here for you and I care for you, whether it's a youth kid or something like that. Maybe someone I don't know, someone that God has sent into your life.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the impact that you can have on a person.
No. I think that's the thing, man, is that you can't save everyone, but you can make a tremendous impact in one person's life and stuff that you may not even realize.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely. And I also think on a spiritual level, you never know how the Holy Spirit's going to move.
No.
Generationally, every generation from our parents, even their parents, so the silent generation, I believe they were born in like the 20s and the 30s. Every generation down, the faith group continues to shrink. Where I think Generation Z is the first generation in our nation's history to be less than 50% believe in God, basically. So I think it's like now 52% don't believe in God and like 48% do. So it's almost 50-50, but it's trending that way. And millennials are less Christian. So you would just assume if things continue in the way they are, Generation Z, millennials have kids, they won't raise them to have some sort of faith. And so you'd assume that's going to continue to decline. Now, part of that is, it's just the reality that we live in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it gives us a tremendous opportunity. Because when in our nation's history have you been able to share the gospel with someone that has no conception or no idea, I should say, of like what church is? Yeah. Like I think when we're like 10, 15 years from now, when we're in our mid 40s, is that they say like your mental peak? I don't know. Something like that. Maybe not.
That would be nice.
But think about like being able to share Jesus with someone, and literally someone might be like, I don't know, like who are you talking about?
Yeah.
I don't know who Jesus is.
Nah. That's
like,
a crazy thought.
Like but that's the reality where there are going to be people around us that have no idea. Like you say, do you believe in the gospel? They're like, what's the gospel? Like,
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
The good news of Jesus?
Yeah, like who's Jesus?
Yeah.
And so, but it gives us the ability to build something beautiful. Like today, like if you minister to most millennials and like Gen Xers have some type of idea of church, or maybe the whole idea of like, I've been burned by the church. And a lot of people walked away from faith because of that in our generation. Now you don't have that. It's like, hey, have you thought about church? Like, I've never experienced church before. Maybe their parents got burned, but like for them, it's like, it's
Or
an
just
open.
never even experienced it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they hear, because only the worst things about the church make it into
That's
the
true too,
media,
yeah, it's in the news, yeah.
Yeah.
So they might have some idea, but not maybe a personal experience.
Yeah.
And because you just never know what the Holy Spirit's going to do. The Holy Spirit could move wherever it wants to. The other week, 2 weeks ago, there was a girl, I think she was 15, and we have a small church, and so someone new's there. I'm like, oh, this is a new person. This is a new person. And so I was chatting to people as they were leaving, and there's this girl who's like, oh, hey, I'm so-and-so, like, are you new here and stuff? And it's your first time? She's like, yeah. And she was like with her grandma across the street, and she just felt called to come to church.
Dang.
She didn't come back, but for that one Sunday, she was there. And I was like, that's nothing I did.
Yeah.
Like, our church has been in the same spot for 80-something years.
Yeah, it's no Google ads we put out.
We don't pay for Facebook ads and stuff. It's just like, we've been doing what we're doing. And somehow the Holy Spirit placed on this girl's heart to walk across the street and go to church. She's like, I saw the church. I looked on the website. Church service was at 10:30 and it was 10:20. And I was like, I'm going to go to church. And so you never know how the Spirit's going to move.
Yeah.
And so I think in the church today, we should be prepared for the Holy Spirit's revival, so we know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, as we talked about, the importance of discipleship and living out an authentic Christian life, because if Jesus sends you people, you better be ready. And I think when we talk about you better be ready, we're not talking about build, expand.
Yeah. Building projects.
Yeah. Oh, man. But it's more about like, okay, do we have the systems in place to disciple these people really well?
Yeah.
Maybe that means you build a bigger building. I don't know. Maybe it means you don't. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But,
and I think it looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
For sure.
It does.
Yeah.
But yeah, you never know what the Spirit's going to do. So I think that's like one of my passions is, I guess in the context is like, how can we as Christians be more Amish? And by that, I mean, be different than the world.
Exactly.
Turn off your electricity.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good challenge, I think, for right now.
Be more Amish in Las Vegas.
Be more Amish. Be like an Amish man in Las Vegas. Yeah. How can you go out and be the salt and the light, and how can you be unstained by the world?
Yeah. How can you be the salt if you've lost your saltiness?
Yeah.
You know? That's just been really convicting for me.
Yeah.
And it's tough to do because you have to define your success as different than what the world defines success.
Yep.
If you're discipling, investing in the people God has around you, you feel like you're following in where God is leading you, that's success. If you're growing and maturing as a follower of Jesus, that's successful.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's tough, though, because you got the stress still of, like, you got to support your family and all that stuff. And, of course, and you take those steps of faith that, like, you have to remember those verses. If God provides for the birds that we hear around us,
Yep.
He'll provide. Yeah, and the flowers, He'll
here yet.
He'll provide for you. Yeah, there's starting to be some little buds coming up.
Yeah.
Some flower buds here and there.
Oh, we got AJ. So AJ's been with us 2 years. 2 years on Friday, and he asked for some flowers. So I bought him a hyacinth.
Oh, nice. Are you gonna plant them, or is it just like a bouquet?
It's in a pot right now.
Okay.
So we're gonna plant them eventually. But the house smells so good.
Nice.
Spring's in the air.
You gotta get some of those annual, like the bulbs planted in the ground.
Yeah.
Come out every year.
That's great. Well, you should go. You got a meeting.
I do, huh?
All right. Spiritual Gap.
Spiritual Gap out. Thanks, guys. Outdoor edition.